everybody to the second quilt turning hosted by the Onaga Historical Society. And I must say that we're learning every year a little bit more how to refine this. But I do want to welcome you, and I would like for you to note the program. We have subtitled this "Quilts Linger On After the Quilter is Gone." And I think as we go through our presenter today and all of our quilts, you'll see that what we are bringing to our community and our nation will linger on well past us. With that, I'd like for everyone to please stand and face the back for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
For Kansas Day, let's sing Home on the Range.
Oh, give me a home on the buffalo road, where the deer and the antelope play, where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the skies are not cloudy all day. Home, home on the range, where the deer and the antelope play, where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the skies are not cloudy all day.
Thank you, Linda. In honor of Kansas Day, I want to read a little poem to you that I always used when I was teaching with the students. It's called The Kansan. Whenever you meet a Kansan, I care not where it may be, under the pines of the forest, out on the waves of the sea. Whenever you speak of Kansas, his eyes will a brighter glow, for every Kansan loves the land where the sunflowers grow. And with that, we celebrate Kansas Day. Just a couple of announcements before we introduce our speaker. The restrooms are out in the entryway to your right. We will have a break after the speaker, so if you haven't had a chance to put your tickets into the door prize sacks, you may do that at that time. You may purchase extra tickets if you're interested in that. We keep adding another table of door prizes that have been donated, so we weren't anticipating that many door prizes. The lady in red back there, Joan Colderman, will have the tickets or the chances for the wall hanging that commemorates Ukraine and the issues that are going on in Ukraine. All the money raised from that, though, will go to UNICEF. That will not stay with us. And that's partly sponsored by the Crafting for Others group that several of us are part of. There is a table back there of free will donations if you're interested. The quilting magazines are free. Please take those home, otherwise they go to Howie's in Manhattan for recycling. We have a lot of displays up today that we hope you take time to recognize. We have a display that all belongs to Rosemary Clements, and some of you will remember Rosemary and her quilting. Anything that I forgot for those of you that are helping? Oh, yes. I told Barb DePew, I says, if I forget something, just hold up your hand. She's holding up the basket in the back where your log cabin icebreaker goes, and we will draw during break time for that, so be sure you have that filled out and turned in. And the grand prize is this crocheted rug done by Reva Boswell, and some of you know her, the quality of her rugs. So, anything else I've forgotten? Okay. At this time, I would like, it's a great deal of pleasure that I get to introduce Daryl and Gay Youngman. A couple of us met them probably 3-4 years ago at another workshop put on by the EHU. And they were talking about vintage machines, and lo and behold, at the museum, we had some machines that are vintage that weren't working. And so we contacted them to see if they would be able to fix these machines for us, and lo and behold, they have a couple pictures of some of the machines they fixed back there. We have a 1861 Grover and Baker machine that Daryl went all over the United States trying to find parts and pieces for that particular, he didn't travel, he contacted all over the United States. And so that is now a working machine, and we have a couple of others that are quite old that are working machines. So that's how we became acquainted with Daryl, and he kind of lives in our museum now, taking care of our machines, when it's warm enough to live there. Daryl's life work has included careers in engineering, in engineering and university libraries. Gay's career encompassed both teaching and secondary education and cataloging and acquisitions at the university level. Gay has been quilting since 1980s. In the middle of the 90s, she acquired her first featherweight machine. Now, how many of you own a featherweight machine? Several. How many of you own more than one? Okay. Gay and Daryl soon developed an interest in vintage sewing machines and began doing educational programs about the history of the sewing machine. In recent years, interest in vintage sewing machines, especially among quilters, has expanded dramatically. To meet the demand for vintage machines, in 2018, Gay and Daryl started the Just Sew Vintage to restore machines for historical interest and to acquire, restore, sell, and maintain vintage machines for use by modern day quilters. So if some of you have some sewing machine questions today, at break time, you might contact them. So they have gone back to their beginnings of teaching and engineering. And how many of you are former teachers or current teachers out there? Isn't it amazing how we wander back to teaching in some way? Today they will present a brief history of sewing machines and demonstrate how vintage machines can be used with modern tools and techniques in quilting. Please welcome Daryl and Gay Young.
Thank you, Debbie. Now we're on.
Good.
Thanks, Debbie.
Look it up.
We had this all figured out just like Studio One, and the equipment fell off the
There you go.
Okay. Thanks, Debbie, for the introduction. It's good to see all of you here. I would imagine everybody here has a couple of different connections with this event, with quilting and with sewing machines. I would guess that most of us probably have family connections or some long-term relationship with a vintage sewing machine. And many of you here are probably quilters. Most of you probably are, and if you're not, you're probably very interested in quilting. So we have kind of combined a couple of our programs that Gay and I do from time to time into what we have today. I'm going to speak briefly about the sewing machine, the history of the sewing machine, the development of the sewing machine, and some impacts that sewing machines have had on our culture over the years. And then Gay is going to deal with those same vintage sewing machines, some of those same vintage sewing machines, and how they're probably among the better choices for your work with quilting today when they're combined with recently developed tools and modern techniques for quilting. Next slide. So I mentioned that sewing machines have, over their history, have impacted our culture, and there are several ways. Yes, it was a great technological development. That's where the engineering part of my background comes in. There's some historical impacts, I'll talk about a couple of those, and cultural and social impacts. And it's a great tool for quilters, and I see it out here in the audience today. Sewing machines and quilting reaches across the generations. Not only when we're using vintage machines here in 2023, but as we remember our families in the past and transfer those memories onto our younger generations. And in the beginning, sewing machine wasn't just an invention. No one just sat down and said, hey, I invented the sewing machine. It was actually, it took a while, and the sewing machine as we know it today, or as it developed into what we know today, really was a combination of several different inventions made by separate people at separate time. The needle, some of you may have seen the cartoon type of things where it was really a leap in technology to put the thread in the eye of the needle at the point of the needle instead of the back. Seems like a small thing today, just a given, but that was a remarkable innovation. Feed dogs, how the fabric is fed through the machine, was invented. Bobbins, there used to not be bobbins in the very, very early iterations of the machines. That had to be figured out. And the problem about tension. A man named John Fisher in 1844 was the first to put these together in a workable sewing machine. And I say workable because in the next slide or two we're going to talk about when that workable sewing machine that combined these inventions became a producible thing. So I mentioned some of these different inventions. Some of these names are going to be real familiar to you. Fisher, I just mentioned, Howe, Singer, Wheeler, Wilson. Some of you probably have older Wheeler and Wilson sewing machines. A lot of you probably have Singers. By 1850, a lot of these inventions were put together. The patent disputes to some degree were hammered out, and the first practical machines were produced. Debbie mentioned a Grover and Baker machine that's over at the museum. That was from 1861, so very, very early in the game, and we'll probably refer to that in a minute. But by 1900, over 20 million sewing machines were being produced every year worldwide. So I'm not sure what the analogy is, but throwing a match into gasoline, something like that. From the 1850s until 1900, sewing machines just took off, and you can imagine the massive impact that had. Sewing machines, yeah, they were a great technological development, but in many cases, sewing machine development led the social development in general. Electric machines were first developed in 1880. In 1882, at the London Exposition, there was an electric machine that was demonstrated. But in the 1880s, large segments of the population didn't have any electricity. I'm getting older every year, but I remember when my grandparents didn't have electricity. So sewing machines were invented, and the electrical innovation was something that really did lead society. Sewing technology, as I mentioned, influenced our culture. I don't know if these influences were visible in real time, but certainly we can look back at several of these and say, yes, sewing machines had that impact. The role of the development of the West. We had people coming from the eastern part of the country out into our part of the country, and at the time they were coming, there wasn't a heck of a lot out here. So they had to be as self-dependent as possible. The 1861 machine that I referred to, we don't have documented proof of this, the provenance of that machine, but it's reasonable to believe that that machine originally came out here on a wagon train. Think of the commitment to taking up a small amount of space you have on a wagon, and you're going to bring a sewing machine with you. I think that's an indicator of the importance of sewing machines to our culture at that time. By the late 1800s, people were moving off the farms, moving to cities and going to factory work, and the living situation, the work hours, all of those were factors that diminished their ability to make their own clothes. So it became more and more important to have factory-made, custom-made clothing. What did that do? It created jobs outside the home for women that really hadn't existed en masse before. Sewing work could be conducted in factories on a mass production basis. I know there's a few people in the room today that have worked in sewing machine factories or factories that involve sewing machines. That's an offshoot of what was going. And something that I didn't know until we really started getting into this, probably a bane and a blessing at the same time to many of us over our lives, but one of the first implementations of installment purchasing of things was for sewing machines. It moved on to washers and dryers and many other things, but sewing machine financing was one of the things for installment plan purchasing. We mentioned some of the very first sewing machines, and we all have a variety of vintages of machines today, if you will, and you can see some of these innovations that have developed over the years. Hand crank machines, very early in the game, treadle-operated machines became possible. I just talked to someone over here about the transition between shuttle bobbins to round bobbins. Electric drive conversions. If you look on a lot of machines from approximately the World War I era and for a decade or two after that are treadle machines, you will see that they were thinking ahead. There's a motor boss cast into the primary arm of the machine because it was anticipation that electric motors would become more popular as more people were connected to electricity. So electric drive conversions at that point became possible. And eventually factory-built electrics. So a lot of innovations, a lot of improvements, and throughout the middle of this is all of you in the audience today, quilters. Without quilters and sewing machines, what would they be? Next slide. This is the Grover Baker machine that's over in the museum here that I mentioned. And the PA system's not going to let me get over close enough to point this out. But you can see it's a very early implementation of a treadle. It's got a flywheel. This particular machine is a chain stitch. And if we weren't fearful of breaking some irreplaceable parts, this machine could be operated this afternoon. Okay, also over in the museum here are another example of another generation. By the 1880s, you can see that the machines had evolved into a general type of machine that probably most of us are familiar with. Wooden cabinet with storage drawers. You can't see it in that picture, but a regular broad treadle plate that can allow for 2-foot treadling. The traditional leather drive belt. And behind you can see the lever for raising and lowering the foot. So by this time in the 1880s, many of the attributes of modern day machines were present. Sewing machines contributed to the war effort. In both World War I and World War II, millions and millions of uniforms. And I like to think of a fairly small item. In World War II, for example, there were over 16 million service members that served in various portions, in various branches just of the U.S. Armed Forces. Pick the simplest item, a work shirt or whatever. If you just made one for each person, there'd be 16 million shirts that had to be manufactured during the war. And this doesn't even count other countries. So the population available to make the uniforms versus the huge demand for uniforms and other equipment couldn't have been done without sewing machines. In World War II, the U.S. War Department developed stitch specifications for a number of uniform items and everything from cartridge belts to parachute harnesses. A certain specific stitch had to meet a certain set of requirements, and that stitch was designated by the government as the 201 stitch. We have a 201 sitting back on the table for you to look at with one of our exhibit machines. Gay is going to talk about that machine a little bit in her comments. So that's a huge contribution that sewing machines made to our society in general and the war effort. After World War II, sewing machines continued to be made, but this is what we call the twilight. Sewing machines are no longer built in this country, and it's a result of several factors: foreign competition, reduced labor charges, workplace regulations, and environmental regulations impacted manufacturing negatively in this country, not just of sewing machines, but of many manufactured products. And a huge factor is the rise of consumer culture. I don't know if this is a question of right or wrong, but one thing that the sewing machine industry did right for many, many decades was to build sewing machines that were almost immortal, virtually indestructible, and if there was damage, easily repairable in most cases. You remember my reference to 20 million a year being produced worldwide in 1900. Well, eventually the world just ran out of people. And for sewing machine companies to keep up with continued demand, it was very tempting for them to go to the consumer culture thing of planned obsolescence and replace the machine rather than repair it. And it's not my place to judge if that's a good move or a bad move. That's how it is. That's how it's been for the last several decades. But I do feel comfortable making some suggestions that you'll hear from Gay about what we as quilters can do with our modern machines and with our vintage machines. Next slide. Those look good.
Sorry, I had to try some of the delicious cookies.
So here we are with kind of a gloomy slide that we just left about the twilight of sewing machine manufacturing in America. The good news is there's a renaissance. It's been going on for a number of years now, and we still have a plethora of vintage machines to think about, to work on, to improve, restore, and to use on our quilts. Vintage machines are attracting a new generation of quilters. I am comfortable saying we probably have some of those new generations here today with us. Solid construction, they're serviceable, they're repairable. They're not meant to be replaced. They're meant to be maintained, restored, and keep on trucking. Nostalgia and family connections are important, and I think those two go together very well. If you have a machine that belonged to a member of your family in an earlier generation, that's pretty special. If you don't, but you have memories of using vintage machines with some of your predecessors in your family, it's reasonable to think that you could get a vintage machine to replicate in part some of that experience. And Gail leads you into this in her part of the program. Vintage machines in many ways are the perfect tool for some recently developed tools and techniques that are emerging in the quilting world and being applied increasingly as time goes on. So, to summarize, vintage machines were built to last and be maintained and not to be replaced. They incorporate industrial style, design and manufacturing techniques. In the 70s and 80s, I worked in manufacturing engineering, and we had big machines. But some of the same techniques, some of the same methods of construction, some of the same ways of producing the machines and time building them are replicated in some of our vintage sewing machines. So it's kind of like being back in the factory again, except that the machines are little. That's good for us. Initially, sewing machines all over the country were supported by a strong and vibrant service and repair industry. It probably would be difficult to go to too many towns on a day and not find at least one sewing machine repair and service center. That's not the case anymore. They're few and far between, and most vintage machines now are restored and maintained by individuals with, like I said, engineering backgrounds that have captured how to take care of these. Next slide. So this summarizes the comments that I just made. And if you find machines that are in less than optimum shape, I would say don't take it as a given that that can be restored to perfect working order, but you've got a pretty darn good chance. So many vintage and antique machines can be refurbished. If you have a family machine, if you run across a machine that hasn't been used for a long time, there is a lot of hope. And small businesses such as ours have been developed to provide those services. We're going to take a real quick look at some of the what I call stars of the vintage era. And for today's presentation, we chose some that are particularly useful for quilting. You could use other vintage machines in a lot of your quilting. Some of you already know that. But we picked out three that are kind of the favorite. The 301, the 201, the 301, and the Singer 221 Featherweight. This is the model 201, and it's the one that I referred to as having the government stitch specification associated with it. It's a direct drive motor with no belt involved, no treadling, no electric motor driving the belt. It's just direct from the motor shaft into the machine, completely gear driven, and the feed dogs drop. So if you're going to do quilting on your machine and you don't want to get into a long arm, you're doing row by row, something like that, you can drop the feed dogs and do free motion work on the 201 just fine. And it's heavy duty enough to do anything that you're probably going to want to tackle. Next slide. The Singer 221 Featherweight, and thanks to all of you that raised your hand for having one or more than one, not to mention any names. Over 3 million of them were manufactured from the early 30s into the middle 60s. 11 pounds in an era of 30 pounds machines. And I didn't do this on purpose, but if you're interested in the comparison, the 201 that's sitting back on the table there is a cast iron machine, and the Featherweight next to it is aluminum casting. Don't really try doing one. Just gently tug on them and you'll feel a huge difference in the heaviness of those. The Singer model 221, the Featherweight, is darling for piecing. You can use it for free motion work, but you need to cover up the feed dogs in some fashion to effectively do that. But it's a great machine, and if you come to quilting workshops and events, it's about as portable as it can get. And I'm not going to say too much about this. Gay can tell you about the virtues of the 301, and she's going to do a demonstration of some of the modern tools here in just a minute. They were introduced in the late 1940s up into the middle 50s. The 301s also are cast with aluminum, not cast iron. So they weigh a little bit more than the Featherweight, but not a heck of a lot more. They're still very portable. They have a handle on them. The feed dogs drop, as I mentioned, they do on the 201. And the slant needle arrangement offers a better visibility to the needle, and that's important to me. I'm pretty good at getting a machine to make a perfect stitch, but I need all the help I can get in me actually making that perfect stitch. So the slant needle helps your visibility, which helps that. And I will close my comments about the 301 by saying that after how many decades of building sewing machines, the 301 is the first Singer model that was made available in colors other than black, in addition to black. So.
Okay, let's see if I can get set up now.
that the next slide? Is that the next slide? Yeah, show it.
All right. Supposedly I turn this on. Slide it. You want to hold it? Okay, can you, everybody hear? We have a short little slide here of a featherweight using free motion quilting, and as Daryl mentioned, dogs do not drop on it, but you can cover them up. Some people use just painter's tape over it, and there is an actual device that you can get to cover it too, but it doesn't work very well. But this person did a pretty good job on it. Okay.
The video illustrates your work.
Yeah. And one of the things to talk about right now is the fact that we are a distributor for the Westerly and So Steady companies that make all the different templates and the ruler foot, which we'll talk about. And this table that you see on this machine is a So Steady table, and really wonderful for when you're doing the type of work that I do. You can see it's a little round foot, and you have to have the correct foot for your machine. So if you have a modern machine and you would like us to get a ruler foot for you, we need to know exactly what kind of machine that you have. And also So Steady does the same thing. If you call them up and tell them what kind of machine you have, they will order the correct one for you. They also call what I call rulers. They are actually templates. That's the name for them. And they make all kinds of designs. You can see in some of the things I have here, these are made with different templates. There's a heart, there's a stocking, and you can come up and look at all these afterwards to see what it is. But that's the template work that you can use. Most of the work that I do here, and we have a group in Blue Rapids called the SOWAT group, and they meet on the third Saturday of each month. And at that time, we work on a Quilt As You Go project, and this is the quilt right here. And I'm going to show you just a little bit here. We're using what I call, the book is called Beth McDonald, and she has a book that shows you how to put free motion quilting or ruler work type of pieces of blocks together. The first one, you start out, you have the whole sashing around it, and we do a frame around each quilt. I don't know if you are just an absolute perfect quilter, but if you are, then you don't need the frame. But if you aren't, the frame is perfect. It gives you a little bit of more room so that you'll never notice on some of the quilt. If you look at the actual quilts, some of them are bigger and some are littler, and you'll never notice the difference. Does anybody here know how to do Quilt As You Go? It's so fast and so easy to do. And this is the machine I like to do my Quilt As You Go on. It's the 301. I have Elizabeth and Rosie are my featherweights, and then I also have 2 of the 301s, and it is my absolute favorite. It's only 13 pounds, it has a handle, and this is opal. And then opal is kind of a tan color, but I have another one that's black, and she's my favorite, and she's bluey. So I use those to do a block like this, And there's so many methods of putting your quilts, your blocks together on free motion quilting, where you just take that ruler foot that I talked about, that's round that you get, and you have to have it exactly at the right level, because if you don't, if it's too high, you'll have a mess. And you see here, I have an example, mess up. That's what it looks like when you mess up. So you have to have everything just perfect. It has to be about like a business card will slip underneath that ruler foot, and it will just glide over your block. What you do with, if you're not familiar with Quilt As You Go, is you will take what we call 3 pieces of fabric. Your top piece, which is what you piece together, your batting, which is your middle part, and your backing, which is what all of these will look like on the back. And it is a wonderful way of not having to take a huge big quilt of all these pieces together and then trying to put it through a machine, and what they have, the dreaded drag. If you know what that is where everything just drops down and you cannot move that quilt. On this, you see there's what they call a slider. That helps your fabric move. It's got a little hole in there where the needle is. It helps your block move around, and you move it around because you drop your feed ducts. And that's something you have to do, is practice, practice, practice. And these are what you call practice pieces. And this is an example of a practice piece where you just fill it up. Every time you start to quilt, you need to have one of these to start out with. Because everything has to be right. Your foot has to be in the right position. You have to have the right thread. You have to have the bobbin in correctly, and it's tested out. Another thing is thread. I'm kind of picky on my thread. I like the Masterpiece thread for this because you know this is a vintage machine, and I know most of you that are quilters use probably Arafol. And that's nice, but Arafols are top heavy. They're like tall and little around like this. And these machines were built for this kind of spool, short, squat, and they fit on the machine just perfectly. And you can also use Coats, but Coats is not like it used to be. It's not as good a brand as it used to be. So I like the Masterpiece thread. If you're doing this, you need to start with a bunch of bobbins filled up, because if you're like me too, you hate to stop and fill up another bobbin as you're going along, or you run out right in the middle of your design, and that's not fun. Here's some other methods if you're not using templates like I showed you with the hearts and stuff. This is called golden threads. I don't know if I can get up there. This is golden threads. And golden threads is just a really thin paper-like thing that you can use. You could draw your design on something like you can buy designs that look like this, and you draw them out on this paper, and you just machine stitch over the top of it, and then tear your paper off. Here you can see beautiful star design, and all you do is tear the paper off, and you've got a perfect design for your block. Another method that you can see here, if I can find it, is painter's tape. Painter's tape is a perfect thing to use because, and I also use a template alongside of it to keep my, I don't know if you have, but I do, of doing a straight stitch down. If you use a straight line template over the top of that, right beside your painter's tape, you'll have a perfect straight line. And this is a crosshatch using the painter's tape, and that's really a popular thing to do for all over big quilt. Some of the other things that I like is I usually use a 90 by 14 needle when I'm doing my quilting. And besides the thread, and here's an example of the painter's tape. And I wanted to show you this particular quilt that we did probably 3 years ago, I think. We did a program, and one of my favorite things to do is paper piecing. And this is an example of a quilt that we did, a little wall hanging that we did several years ago. And it's all quilt as you go. And they were little 6-inch blocks that we did paper piecing with, just solid fabric, and put together. And I think it turned out really well. I did a template in the center of all of them, and then straight line around the rest of the squares. And you can show them the back. There's several methods of quilt as you go. You can do everything together without any sashings in between. This has a small sashing. This has a 2-inch sashing. And there's different things you do as a result of using a bigger sashing and a smaller sashing. You can also put just blocks together. And what you do when you put a block together, you will sew the top part to the next piece that you're putting on. And then when you go over to the back part, you have extra fabric. You see that I've left an inch around everything. And then this will just fold over, and you can either hand stitch over the top of it, or you can actually sew it on the back. But if you sew it, it'll leave a line, so I usually do the hand stitching. I think I've pretty much gone through a lot of the things that you talk about. We talked about the 201. If you have a stationary place to keep your 201 and you're not moving it around, because like Daryl said, it's about 30 pounds. It's really heavy. Then it is a wonderful machine to use, and the feed dogs drop on it too. And it has a beautiful stitch. And I don't know if you've got modern machines, but you have 250 different stitches you can use on the machine. How many of you use more than 2 or 3? Yeah, some people do, and those are the people that are doing the embroidery work probably. But I never really got into the embroidery work. I just like to piece. I like to just sit down for hours at a time and put little pieces, and the littler the better. I just love little pieces. If you've got some ugly fabric, just cut it smaller. You'll never see it. All you see is color. That's it. So take that ugly fabric and just cut it up into little bitty pieces. I think I've kind of gone through most of the things I wanted to say. Daryl, do you have anything else that I've forgotten? I guess we're open for questions.
Where are you located?
Olsburg.
Olsburg. Okay. Is there a phone number? I don't see anything on it.
In the about 5 million things that we brought today, I forgot to bring our cards. So Daryl has a piece of paper if you want to write your name down and give us a phone number.
Do you have a website or do you have Facebook or something?
We do have a website, but we really don't know how to use it. It is on there, and you can call up Just So Manage and you can find it, but you probably won't get an answer back. So you probably just want to put your name down and give you a phone number, and we will send you a card, and you can tell us what you want. Yes.
My mother had a white growing up in the 40s and 50s, so I inherited that. And then when we were in Japan, I thought a singer hated it, so I went back to the white, and that's what I thought now, but you never mentioned white.
Whites, Daryl can tell you about whites.
In past presentations, I have referred to as Singer as being the elephant in the room. Singer made so many different machines for so long that when we get to looking for representative things like feed dogs dropping, lightweight, things like this, it's just a lot more expeditious to use Singer for an example. There are some fabulous white machines, and up until, I'll say, middle 60s, there's a lot of really nifty Kenmore machines too. So don't feel like we're promoting Singers, and don't feel bad about having a white by any means. They're in the right vintage. They're very repairable and fabulous machines.
What was the name of that, the yellow tissue paper again that you?
Golden threads.
Golden.
That's really great. Yeah.
This is probably a given, but you will then work on these vintage machines for us?
Yes.
How long, if we bring it up, how long does it take? A week, 2 weeks?
We go to Blue Rapids every third Saturday. You can drop it off with us there if you want to. We're usually there from noon till about 3 or 4 o'clock.
Blue Rapids where?
At the museum.
At the museum?
You can go in and look at the stuff they have in the museum there too.
So I have a Singer from my mom, but it's in the cabinet with the 2 drawers like you said. So how would you work on something like that because it's in the case?
You can take it out.
The best way, she's asking about a treadle machine that's in a cabinet, similar to the Queen that I showed for an example. And the best way to transport those machines is to remove the machine itself from the cabinet. And you can transport them in the same vehicle, but you should not transport them.
So I know it needs a belt. So how would you put the belt on without it being in the case?
If you're not going to transport it, you don't need to take it out.
So do you come to people's houses?
We could. I mean, the answer to that is it depends, and I don't like that answer, but sometimes it's very convenient and very easy for everybody to do it that way.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's absolutely the wrong answer, depending on what.
And it is a good thing because basically at that point you could try it out. If we put a belt on, you can try it out. We can make sure what else needs to be done with it. And if it is something that just needs to take the top off of it, and he just needs to put new oil in it and all that stuff. Doesn't need the other thing.
Okay.
I have a demonstration up here to show you how to do free motion quilting, template type work, but I only got like 4 minutes. So if you want to come up real quickly, I add a few at a time, and I will be here for a little while, and you can come up and try it yourself.
I haven't made myself higher.
Oh, and also here's a wooden foot thing that you can put on your machine.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, we have those too.
If you need to stand up to see what Gay is doing, feel free to do that. There, you might ask about the quilting workshop they do once a month if you're interested. They also have a fabulous museum up there. It's just wonderful.
Okay, we want to move
We
you to
are
the corner,
extremely
and we're going to disconnect.
Linda, you want to go ahead? Wait a minute, we were going to sing happy birthday to Kansas. Yes, we need to sing happy birthday yet. Go ahead, Kansas.
Okay, we're going to sing happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Kansas. Happy birthday to you. And many more.
I will let, Linda Rodenkamp is kind of the head of how this will all happen. I want to thank our quilt holders, Kathy Martin and Annette Klein, and I thought we had another one here.
Right behind you.
Oh, and Barb Depew, and May Barb. We also want to thank May for the sound system today. We had to look for people that were a little taller.
Not tall.
So those are our quilt winners. With that, Linda, I'm going to turn it over to
Okay,
you.
what we want to do is call your name, and you'll come up, and probably to help everybody, if you would use this mic and talk about your quilt. And then let those two people that are holding it, hold it for you, and then they'll fold it, and we'll put it over there. And this bed, we're going to put them all over there. And then when we get to this bed, we'll put those onto this. So that's so you know where to look for your quilt. And then go on down. The oldest quilts are to our left over here. And we're going to go two at a time to hold it up. And then after they fold it, the other next two are going to come right up, and we'll hopefully be able to get your name and kind of yell it out so you'll come up. So Sue Martindale, starting.
I do want to remind you, we'd like you to keep your comments to 2 minutes. Otherwise, we'll be here at midnight yet, and there's another group coming in at 6 o'clock tonight.
I'm Sue Martindale. A couple years ago, my brother asked me to make him a quilt for his place at the lake. He said, all I want is a mariner's compass. I don't want anything else. All he wanted was a mariner's compass. He did not want anything else. So I made the mariner's compass, and I looked at it and thought, that is the most boring quilt I have ever seen. So I put the snail trail around the edge with the leftover fabric, hoping that they looked like waves. And I thought, that is the most boring quilt I've ever seen. So I quilted the living daylights out of it. I'm a hand quilter. There's a Celtic kind of around the middle, and there's ropes around the edge, and there's waves, and there's ripples, and I think there's some anchors and some like ship's wheel things. Anything I could think of that would add interest.
Let's see the back.
This way. This way so you can see the back.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, the back.
He gave me the color palette to work with, and I'm also not a very fan of brown, so that was a little tough.
It turned out beautiful.
Did he like it?
Martha Turner. Is that correct? Am I misreading them? Nope. I don't know.
She's coming by.
Yeah, come on up. Or whoever. She's coming. Okay. Hey, could you hold it up about the middle? Yeah. And then you can, that way it won't. Yeah, there you go. Drag. This is, yeah. Okay, there you are.
Find a way up here.
Yeah.
This quilt was quilted by my daughter Jennifer. She's over here waving at us. She gave it to me for Christmas a couple years ago. I do a chicken theme in my house for decorations. And as you see, it's got chickens and barns. I have 3 daughters. Each one of them contributed some of the fabric that's used in this quilt. And then we had, she displayed it in Dodge at a show, and I can't remember what the show was. Dodge City Days Quilt Show. So we have that as, you know.
If you want to turn it around, you can show the back side. It's not plain.
Oh.
She used each of the blocks that were a print, did a fussy, what's it called, fussy quilt? Fussy cat. See, I'm not the quilter. So anyway, that's that one.
The next one is Sylvia Walk, and followed by that, if you'll get ready, Steve Staley. That way we don't have quite as much lag time. Otherwise, okay.
Somewhere along the line, I got a book, the 501 Quilt Blocks, that gives you directions. And there was 30-some patterns that all of the blocks had the word star in the name of the block. So that's my star quilt, and I finished it up during lockdown COVID.
What's the back? Yeah, turn it.
I had it machine quilted, and
Steve, show me yours.
Yeah, pretty.
Here's Steve.
Jennifer Whiff will be after Steve.
How many of you have ever messed with metallic thread?
Yeah.
Has anybody ever? Okay, you know what she's talking about then. This is all hand embroidered, hand quilted. She got the idea about 2009 of making it for me. I'm a little bit of a history nut, as I'm sure she can tell you. But she designed it on paper, how it's going to look. We took a king-size quilt and laid it out the size and decided an 8-inch circle would be about the size we wanted it. So she took a grease pencil and made the circles. Then as the state quarters came out, she copied them off of the internet and made paper patterns and traced that with the grease pencil on there, then embroidered it.
Wow. That is
Yeah. Geraldine, she's not a talker.
Did you stand up, Geraldine, because you think of the work she went into. I didn't notice Pat O'Grady, but we will need Pat O'Grady and then me.
Let's see. So, okay. It took approximately 25 minutes to put each 30-inch length of the metallic thread on, because she had to put it on double layers because single, it was breaking off all the time. So, using that, we ended up figuring out that at 3,000 yards of spool, we went through, I can't, what was it? Was it 13 spools, I think she said. So you can do the math. It was an astronomical amount but we figured out it was roughly 670 hours just of embroidering on that quilt.
Wow.
So, I don't know. It took approximately 8 years to finish it. Yeah. Do you have anything you'd like to say? Okay. Like I said, she's not a talker.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I wasn't planning on talking about my quilt, but this is a J. Michelle Watts quilt. She's a designer. She's a designer in New Mexico. And it's applique, machine applique, and embroidery.
Let's
I
do
like
it
the way
over
she
the other
signed
way,
the back.
because
See
the
the
back
back,
sign.
yeah.
Is it machine quilted?
Yes. I don't even remember the quilter. Okay. Somebody in Texas, I think.
Okay, Jennifer, and after Jennifer will be Jenny Moore. No, I take that back. After Jennifer is Ann Abbott's, and then Jenny Moore.
So my name is Jennifer Whip. I'm a veterinarian, but in my free time and to get a break from the craziness of work, I like to cut up fabric and then turn it into something pretty because I can actually see it be done, whereas getting a patient well, it can take several months sometimes. So this is actually the first full-size king quilt that I made on my own. I asked my family to give me navy blue and white fabric. So this is a family quilt, one for your Christmas. And then everybody could participate. And then it is called Endless Summer, the pattern, a modern strip quilt. And I have on the back which magazine I got it out of, but this is for my bed in the summer. And kind of got me the, hey, I can actually make a quilt if I do a little bit here and a little bit there. So.
On the back, you mentioned what is this? How did you order it, or what?
So the quilt label is a remnant of the fabric that was used in the quilt, and then you can get fabric that is on paper, and with inkjet printer you can put on the information, because I don't write neatly. Did I mention I was a doctor? So to get the information of the quilt so people could read it, I did that. Before I was able to purchase that fabric paper, I did hand embroider my name in the, I always put my name and the year that I completed the quilt in the lower right-hand corner.
I'm Ann Abbott. As you can see, there's a lot of different colors here. Our group is the LWML ladies from St. Luke Lutheran Church in Wheaton. We have about 6 people, sometimes as few as 3. And we meet every Monday now. They have been meeting and doing quilts since about 1960 or before. And they used to bring their sewing machines to the church basement. And they would do quilting there, hand quilting, and then the other ladies would be tying the blankets. So, yeah, so we got a little bit shorter on people, but we've also extended the length of time that we do it. There's another one over here. And this quilt here and this one will most likely be donated to the Orphan Grain Train. We've been participating in that for a long time, and yes, those are dinosaurs. We had quite a few, about 2 or 3 that we ended up, small ones, that were girls. So I had it around, put that together out of two pillowcases. We've now started also donating to, well, we've been doing it for a long time. The Manhattan Crisis Center, they get 20 blankets a year. The Oregon Orphan Grain Train get 20. And now we're at 20 doing for the veterans. We sent 10 out to Ogden to the New Hope Fellowship House, and 10 went to the Oskaloosa Veterans Home. And we also did almost 40 pillowcase dresses this year to go to the Orphan Grain Train.
I think our quilts go far and wide for many, many different purposes, and I think this is one illustration of how our quilts help the world. And we want to thank those groups that do that. Thank you.
Do we know who's this one is?
I'm Jenny Moore, and I made this quilt a few years ago. Our younger son spent the summer in Uganda. 12 or 13 years ago when the country was barely out of war, and he was supposed to be working with them on computers, but he said 90% of the people still lived in huts with dirt floors, which by the way, they swept every day. But anyway, one day they took him, the bishop that he was with, took him to a little fabric store and wanted him to tell them how big we are so that they could make us clothing. And while Brian was there, the fabrics are really bold and bright. He said, would you keep the scraps for a week for my mom? And he brought home 2, like Walmart or grocery kind of bags, just stuffed full of scraps, just so that I could see them. And you can see they're really bold, really bright. So I had them for a couple years, and most of them were curved. They trimmed them off of things from a garment. So I washed them to make sure they didn't fall apart, and then I just started cutting them with straight lines, and then I went ahead and put brown strips between the colors because those bold fabrics, I couldn't figure out any way to put them next to each other. And if you look at the border around the bottom, that's what I had left with those little bitty pieces. But he likes it, it's fun.
Yeah.
Sherry Westfall, followed by Sherry Westfall, followed by Carmen Bloomfield.
My quilts don't really have much of a story. I just love to quilt. I've done it for about 9 years. I love working with the retro fabrics, and this just caught my eye, and I enjoyed making it. I learned to do some of the string piecing in it, and the yo-yos were really fun to put on and make.
Okay. It's a happy quilt.
How long did it take you to make it?
I would say probably a year to a year and a half, probably.
Is it machine quilted?
Yes, it is. And this is another one. My mother loved flowers, so I like the brightness of this. It's Stitcher's Garden too, and I made the Stitcher's Garden 1, which is out of the pastel, kind of different patterns, but similar. And again, I just like the bright colors, and I like the pattern, and this was a challenge. I might mention all the different stitches on the sewing machines. This pattern pushes that. There's probably at least 50 different stitches. In the pattern, it gives you a stitch to use in each of those blocks. And if your machine doesn't have that particular stitch, then you just adapt the closest you can to it. But it was fun learning using the different stitches.
This is Grandmother's Flower Garden. I started it in February of 2016, and it took me about 4 years to piece. Each of those hexagons is hand-pieced, and I quilted it, hand-quilted it. So it took me, I put it away for a couple years because I didn't have the facility to quilt it myself. So I put it away until my husband did make me something like a grace frame, which I can roll up my own. I have it. So I could do that in my own home. And it took me another, it took me 3 years to piece it. I put it away for a couple years, and it took me another 6 months, 6 to 9 months, I've forgotten now, to quilt it, hand quilt it.
Are these materials from family, or you're just an eye you had for?
They were all donated pretty much to me, and I just love, that's part of what I love most, is matching the colors together.
Nice job.
We lost the tag on this, but we think we know who it is.
It's right there.
Yep.
On the right-hand side corner.
Other side.
This is piece and quilted by Dee Groff. She knew it.
Hi, I'm Dee Groff. This was a barn quilt we did in a class at my shop, and it took us over a year to do all the blocks. And I stitched it and quilted it.
And then we have her daughter with a couple of quilts. And even though the quilt isn't here today, I have to let you know that Dee did do a quilt with her granddaughter when she was, what, 3?
We worked on it while she was 3, 4, and 5.
So, but she didn't want to bring that to, the granddaughter didn't want to bring it, right? Is that right?
We tried to talk her into it, but she said, I didn't want to talk in front of people. This one I made for my husband.
Close to the mic.
This one I made for my husband. He's really into music and guitars. He was always taking my lap quilt, so I had to make him one instead. And I really like the tie quilting on it because my grandma used to do that, and it's a really cozy kind of thing. And then I made this one for my son, probably in about 2018. It was for his crib. And I just started with the center panel, and then I just kind of played around with the outer borders to give it a little extra.
Janet Finney, and then after that me.
This is Rainbow Stars, and in 2013, I think it was, I took a quilt class at the Concordia Quilt Shop and using the X-Block rulers. And so this is, I had some fat quarters, and so I just started, I was fairly new to quilting then, so I didn't know really a whole lot. But anyway, this is how it ended up. And a friend helped me quilt it on their long lawn. I finished it in 2015, so it took me 2 years. And that's mine. Yeah, that's called Fancy Feathers. And I took last spring, we went to Minneapolis and took a Laura Heine applique class. And I thought a long time about taking this class. I don't know if you guys have heard of her, but she has these, she gives you the design, and then I didn't buy a kit. This was all out of my stash. And you just put it together. And I asked family members, should I do this? I wasn't sure how my rooster would come out. And they all said, well, where were you hanging rooster? Why do you want a rooster? What would you do with it? And so I did decide to go ahead and try it, and I'm glad I did because I'm happy with how it came out. And so that's why I named him Fancy Feathers. So I think he deserves to be hung anywhere in my house. And I machine quilted that on my domestic machine. I did that.
You will notice that we have a couple of very young quilters here today. And isn't it wonderful to get this generation, just a few of them involved. I'm just very proud of you.
I started this quilt as a 4-H project for the 2022 4-H year, but I originally started it in 2021 with the help of my grandma Loretta. It did take me quite a long time though. I don't know how long it took me, possibly a year. My grandma helped me pick out a lot of the fabric that we use, and the jeans and the pockets came from my dad and my 2 grandpa's jeans. If you did notice, the seams are a little off, but
You're not supposed to tell us that. Perfect.
We all know how it goes.
nice and small.
The squares are 10 by 10 squares, and I had to sew them, and I trimmed all of that sitting at my Aunt
Each
Gail's
one of
store.
these are cut.
Yep.
That's
I
cut
trimmed it
by
all sitting
hand.
at my Aunt Gail's store and had about 9 crafts while doing that.
That is awesome.
Flannel.
Yes.
Oh, this is one. I get to talk. Okay. My mom quilted, and this was probably one of my first ones that I worked on with piecing. Dee Groff had a little class, and we went down with Sue Martindale, and I just loved this material. And basically, you wouldn't have thought that would have came out of there, but all that is out of one piece of fabric. And she taught us how to try to get different pieces and make the triangles and stuff, and it ended up getting a pattern for each of the squares. And it was a lot of fun. It was around, well, I don't know, what year, 2018 maybe? I don't know.
This quilt top is finished. It has not been quilted yet. It has kind of an interesting story to it. How many of you volunteered to do something that didn't really know what you were getting into? Well, my nephew's father passed away a year ago this January. And I said to my nephew, after seeing what Dee Groff had done for a lady, taking her husband's shirts and making them into a quilt. So I said to my nephew, if you want me to take your dad's shirts, I will make you a quilt. How many of you think you have done that? It sounds pretty simple. Till I got these shirts, and these shirts were all these Indian motifs and everything, plus the motorcycle, the Harley, that my nephew wanted in the middle. And so
And it's got pockets on it, too.
It has pockets on it. If you'll notice, the shirt snaps have been appliqued into this. There's the different little tags throughout here. There's t-shirt, there's pockets. It's kind of like a Where's Waldo. You can find lots of things in that quilt. Putting it together was really kind of a trick. He was a large man, but when you start to cut up shirts, you don't get large, long pieces of fabric out of it. So you end up having to piece things. But I brought it today, even though it hasn't been quilted, because I want my nephew to have it by this time next year. So, and I would call that his memory quilt. And Vivian, this is my granddaughter.
Last summer, for a 4-H project, I made this quilt for my great-grandfather. At the beginning of the summer, my grandma and I decided on a design, but once we got the fabric, we realized how small the pieces would have to be cut. So we changed the pattern, and we began to sew it in a chicken pattern as a farm theme for my great-grandfather. And since we had those little squares that we cut out for the original design, we decided to make bars in between and to tie it so it looks more like a farm quilt.
It's like chicken. Do you know how many hours it took you, Vivian? Do you know how long it took you? I bet he had the biggest smile on his face.
He did. I have to, she'll probably not talk to me for a little while, but I'll have to tell you a little bit. Vivian doesn't work real fast all the time. And she was working on the binding, and she was just sitting there. And I said, Vivian, what are you doing? Oh, I'm naming the chickens. So, her great-grandfather was very, very touched. Her great-grandfather was 94, so it was a good gift. Oh, this is mine. How many of you have done blue jean quilts? I have blue jean squares going all the time, for one reason or another. There's nothing really special about this quilt, other than I did make it and tie it, and it will go to the Down Syndrome Association of Northeast Kansas as a fundraiser. I have a little grandson that is Downs, and there is a need for projects for them to raise money to help with Down syndrome. So that was done as a fundraiser. And I think that I brought it to illustrate that our quilts have many, many purposes out there. So, thank you.
Let's do this.
Okay, we have Joan Colderman, and then Barb Rizak.
I was going to say, you might want to. Yeah, go. Be careful you don't get it in front of that speaker. It's going to squeal.
I'll get up in the other now. There you go. You guys got that one?
Yeah, it needs to show back to you guys stay partners. Stay.
Sure.
And see.
We're so good. This was made, and we're going to get this.
Okay.
Whoops.
Okay. I made this quilt, well, my daughter actually sewed it together, but I made each one of my kids a quilt for their graduation. This was for my youngest son. It was made out of, I had saved his dad's jeans for years that cut the good pieces off, and his grandfather's overalls, which you can tell the stripes on them. And then all of these caps, I had over 100 labels off of the Gary's caps that we sewed on there.
Flannel shirts?
And the backwards K with the bar on top is our cattle brand.
Oh.
So I thought she did a wonderful job. I wouldn't have had all of the detail in there with the backwards K.
Were these all of his flannel shirts also, or?
Most of them, yes. Yeah, they were Gary's flannel shirts.
So show us the cattle, the brand.
The brand again. Where is it?
It's on both sides.
Oh, is that on both sides?
So graduation from high school, college?
High school.
High school.
See, on this side, the backwards K is in denim. On the other.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. On the other side is in flannel.
Okay.
This is a weighted blanket also.
Yes, it's right in style. It is very heavy.
Yeah. Okay, who's this? Barbara Rizak. Barb Rizak. That's another Barb.
You'll probably see from mine, I'm not a traditional quilter. This may look very traditional. This is king size. I started this, oh gosh, I don't know how many years ago, far too many, and had partially quilted it. Well, then when Debbie called me about bringing some quilts, last week I finished the quilting on it. So what generation it is, who knows? But the star in the center is sometimes known as the Lone Star, Texas Star, Morning Star. There's all kinds of names for it. And generally you're piecing together diamonds of fabric, or they later developed one where it's strip fabric. This one is based on its interfacing that's gridded off, and so you sew on rectangles of fabric. But the nice thing about this, everything's marked on here, so when you stitch the final stitching and you're putting your rows together, every point matches. It can't miss.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's how you do it.
Our speaker talked about using a Golden Threads quilting paper. I know at this distance you can't see it, but there's a star-shaped quilting design in the borders there. That was done with Golden Threads quilting paper. The rest of the quilting around the tulips is free motion. So if I'd have known now what I did it now instead of started 20 years ago or whenever it was, I would probably not put as much just stippling in it, because now I can do ruler work, so I can make it do other designs and things. So the tulips I just designed to fit in those blocks on the side. And as I said, it is king size. And I put my bindings on with my serger. This may look like it's pieced, but it's all done in the embroidery machine. It's worked in blocks. Let me come over here a minute. I can talk loud enough. It's worked in blocks, so you can pick out a block here. Some of these blocks would take up to 2 hours for the machine to just stitch them out, because a lot of what you see in color on here is thread. There are places where there's fabric underneath it, but a lot of, for example, all this green right here, that's thread. There's no green fabric underneath it at all. Wow. Yeah. The blue is fabric underneath, and the green is fabric, but when you get out into here, the purple, that's all thread. Cool. So it just depends on, and
then you gotta see the back too, because
it could be reversible. So you work the squares like you would blocks in other quilts. And when you put this in your hoop, you have to use a battleizer, they call it. It's batting, but it has a stabilizer in it. Otherwise, the blocks will warp. And so when you're stitching it, I have a small sample here. You have your face fabric, your batting, and your backing. It's all in your hoop. And then you stitch it out, but it stitches a line around the outside, and that is your seam line where the blocks are going to join. And you must be on that seam line, otherwise those little triangles and things don't match up. Wow. So after you take it out of the hoop, then you have fabric on the front. You have a special tool that you actually cut away all of the batting and the backing. So it's clear down to that seam line. Then you sew them together. This is kind of a quilt as you go, as the speaker was talking about too. You sew them together on that seam line, and then you cover the back with another strip of fabric. And yes, I stitch all of mine down with the machine. If my machine doesn't do it, I probably don't do it. And so I use clear thread, so you can't see where I've stitched that sashing down on the front at all. So that whole big quilt is stitched with clear thread. So you can't really see where it's stitched.
Would you make another one?
Yes. In fact, I have, well, this one's the starting of another one. I'm not going to make another king size. I don't have a use for another king size, but that goes on my bed when I get home. But it's fun. It's just kind of different, and some of it's piecing, some of it's thread. It just depends on the pattern that you use. Thank you.
That is awesome.
Yeah, very happy.
I don't know, can you tell who this one is?
Come on up, whoever, leave her off.
And they're gonna stick him down. It's on the back over here by, that's hands.
Well, she has, this is my mom's. And if she hadn't embroidered the date on it, I wouldn't have known. I don't know.
It's up there by Annette's hands. I think.
There you go.
This was done in 1999. These are all vintage handkerchiefs made into butterflies. And all the handkerchiefs were either my mother's, my grandmother's, my great aunts. They were all family handkerchiefs. And she did all the folding and applique and embroidery on them. So, and it was machine quilted by a lady in Alta Vista, I think. I don't know.
Right on the back. Deanna. That's there we go. She's coming.
Well, back in the early 90s, I'm really not a quilter. Back in the early 90s, before children, I got this wild idea that I wanted to hand quilt a quilt. So I got the Hirschner's catalog out, picked out my thing, ordered it, bought one of the quilt rack. Anyway, it was in my living room. So I started it, then I had kids. So I bet this thing probably took, I started in the early 90s, and I'm sure it was early 2000s, mid 2000s when I finally got it done. So.
This is the back. Should we show it too?
Yeah, it's just.
All hands.
So I did get it done.
Awesome.
And then the next one's mine. And like I say, I really am not a quilter, but we got a motor home and the couch was really ugly. And so I was like, okay, I want to cover it up. It's like, oh, I'll make a quilt. So with Sue Martindale's help, this is a stack and whack. Picked out my fabric, and she helped me along, and she helped me cut everything where I was supposed to. I pieced it, and she hand quilted it for me. I think I binded it, but she did hand quilt it for me. So, and that's my second and probably last.
No more of this.
I'll help. Okay. I'm Linda. And the voting Steinlog, you made that quilt. And it's made out of all the shirts and stuff that we grew up in, and she did. And it would probably be in the 80s, 90s. And then we handed the quilts on to grandchildren. So I got that from my daughter Liz, who likes lime green. So, and it's all hand done. Yeah, that's what she did. I love this. This belongs to Mom too. You can talk about this or Donna. Donna's coming. She knows more about it. I'm on there, but she knows more about it.
Does she? You want to fold it in half and show one?
Yeah,
the
let's
front
do
half
that.
and then the back half?
Yeah.
I think it's easier.
Hi, I'm Donna Bryan, and I made this quilt for my mom and dad's 40th wedding anniversary, and I didn't know how to do anything, so I embroidered the roses, and then the ladies, and I embroidered did the names, and then at that time it was one for every daughter or every child and grandchild and spouse, I think.
Every spouse, yeah.
What year?
1985. And the reason it's got like the roses here and then the names is because the way we was taught to make the bed when we was at home, you put it over the pillows and then tucked it in, and then, so that made the roses line up on the top of the bed. And then the ladies at the Onaga Senior Center quilted it, and the hearts are in red thread on the white.
This is the one I made for my oldest daughter for graduation. Candle wicking was the thing at the time, and so it is machine pieced. Has her name and date of graduation in the middle, or on there somewhere. Yep. And then I put the piping and the edging rather than making a complete quilt, and made it like a bedspread.
That's what this is.
Yeah.
This is a t-shirt quilt. Terry Stahl? Oh. Well, good. It says t-shirt quilt. Doesn't say a name.
Here she is.
Oh, okay.
It's happened.
Shucks, we can't take it home. No.
Hi, I'm Nancy J. Merritt, and I had this T-shirt. I'd been saving T-shirts of my son's for his high school graduation. I decided I would make this. Well, I started it and had to have help because on a T-shirt you have to have a backing thing. So a lady had to show me how to do that. You can show the back too. But I'd saved T-shirts all that time. One other thing I wanted to say is I have a quilt back there, and there's been Levi quilts here, but I've not seen any like the one I made. I had 7 pair of my husband's jeans, and I didn't know what to do with them and make a quilt. So I cut them up in the crotch, split them open, 2 legs at a time. I dyed them, different red colors, and then I put them together with print. And like I said, that one's up there, but it turned out different.
Okay, my name is Terry Hubbard Stahl, and in 1985, my sisters and sister-in-law, we got this bee in our bonnet that we were going to make a commemorative quilt for our parents' 40th, and this is what we made. And I want to recognize my sister-in-law Nancy Hubbard, my sister Linda Johnson, and my aunt Isla Faye Wegman. But we shared fabric, and we told everybody, do whatever you want, just have it back here as quick as you can, and make sure that it doesn't exceed this measurement. And so Nancy put it together, and it represents who we are and what our parents were. And then I wrote a book, because I was a history teacher, and we featured the quilt as the theme of our book, and the whole book is a quilting and sewing theme. And so it recognizes who made what, which of the various squares, and the kind of the irony of all this. So we got this idea in the late May, and we were supposed to have it done by September. So we were rushed, and of course it wasn't quilted, so we gave Mom a top. And it's our mother's quilting. So she had a big house, put up a quilting frame, and worked on it most of the winter. And so it's for her and sort of by her. Thank you.
This is a kind of old new quilt. My mother appliqued the sunbonnet Sue's in the squares, and I'm thinking she probably did it in the late 30s, maybe early 40s. I don't remember ever seeing her work on it, and I was born in 43, so I think she probably done it maybe before she got married. And she died when I was 21, and I wanted to preserve those quilt blocks. I washed them. I thought, well, they'll probably fall apart. I washed them and they didn't fall apart, so I went down to All About Quilts, used to be open on Highway 24 there in Manhattan, and they had a whole rack of material that was typical of that time period, and they come up with the pattern for me, and so I was able to preserve my mother's blocks. And I always think of the Bible verse, don't put new wine in old skins, but we'll see how it works.
This quilt was made by my grandmother for my folks' wedding. It's a friendship quilt.
You want to go the mic over here, Steve?
Some of you know Ray Staley. That would be my son. I keep a picture like this. It's a picture of Grandma that made it, Dad that it was 4, and me and my son. And then this is where Dad and one of the uncles were holding it up when they gave it to him. And that's an idea to help pass it on down. That's pretty much.
What are the names?
This would have been, let's see, 52, 51. Okay.
Are the names of family members?
It's ones that attended the actual wedding.
Okay.
And if you, let's see, I think it's
Here's
on
Aunt Nell
there.
back here. Yeah, Mrs. B.F. Parnell.
That was the preacher.
And Mrs. B.F. Parnell. Grandma Bob.
But there's someplace on there.
I saw a Daddy Staley.
That would be Grandpa Staley. That would have been her husband. And she did all that, of course, and I think it's all done by hand because I don't know if she even had a sewing machine. She may have, but
What year again?
this had been 52, 51.
52.
So why is an airplane here?
I have no idea. I wasn't around. That was a year or so before me.
Harry State.
So here I am again. This is my mother's work, and we think she did this while she was pregnant with my oldest brother, John Dennis, in 1946. And if you had the pleasure of getting up close to it, she did really fine applique. And we think it's probably a kit, but the quilting is equally fine. Very nicely done, and it's just a family heirloom that we treasure. Thank you.
My mother-in-law, Delta Martin, did a lot of quilting. Oh, it was too close. Speaker. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. And she quilted all the time. She'd have to clean out her living room of all furniture so she could put her quilt rack in there. And as she got older, David and I'd have to go out there and change it. But she gave, this one was given to me for my wedding shower. Then she gave us a wedding ring quilt a month later when we got married. She has given all of her children at least 2 or 3 quilts. She made tons and tons of baby quilts. They're all hand quilted. Unfortunately, she had a whole bunch set back, but then when our youngest Joey came along, he was totally unexpected. She'd given them all away. So we have stolen a couple of the blankets from his brothers and sisters to hold back for him. So this is a log cabin quilt. She would also go up to Aunt Mandy Honey's. I'm sure a lot of you remember Mandy Honey's up on Main Street. And a bunch of ladies would sit back there and quilt and talk and visit. So some of them were hand quilted up there also. This is an example of one of the baby quilts she did. This is embroidered and then quilted. She's also done sunbonnet Sues. She did little orange teddy bear appliques. All of them are very different, all of them so special and unique. When I told David I was coming up here and I was bringing 2, and he looked at me and he goes, well, we got a whole heck of a lot more than that. I'm like, yes, honey, I know. But, yeah, so, she tried many years to teach me how to quilt. I am a crocheter by trade. I could get the top stitches to look, small and straight, and you'd look on the bottom, and they'd be going like this. So needless to say, this is an art I have not picked up from her, but she also crocheted. She was an amazing woman with crafts and stuff. So those are her quilts.
This is my oldest quilt, and if you notice, it doubles as a rag.
I think it was made by my grandmother, Grace Cayley, on a treadle machine, which I now have. And she hand quilted it all, probably for our new house, which was in 1959. It has been with me everywhere, and it's a mess. It's got big holes in it. It now lives on a quilt rack, a quilt ladder, a lot of love. It's been washed and loved and cuddled and probably chewed on, and not by a dog. It now lives on a quilt ladder that my brother made for me out of my grandmother's quilting frame.
Oh, awesome. Jennifer Whiff, and what's neat is that design is similar to this.
It's a little bit late to ask you to do this, but it was brought to my attention, it'd be nice if we knew your name and where you're from. So from now on, say, I'm from Timbuktu.
So I'm Jennifer Whip from Dodge City, Kansas, but I grew up in Olsburg, Kansas. That's how I knew to come back out here. So this is a double wedding ring quilt that my mom and sisters found in a farmhouse near Hutchinson called Plevna, Kansas. And the farm itself was one of the a homestead that our family got from the Homestead Act. My great-grandmother made this quilt, and I think it's actually older than I said. I think it's actually before 1940. So we found the top pieced, but not quilted. And so then my mom worked with a quilter out of near Lake Pomme de Terre in Missouri to machine quilt, but do it in the style that would have been hand quilted. And then she found the reproduction, about 1930 era's fabric for the binding, and then I did the binding, which I was told it wasn't really period correct, but it was going to be a much better for the edges than what they would have done. And so then I did the binding double layer and then hand stitched around the back.
Okay, well, I'm Donna Bryan from here at Onaga, and like I told you before, I didn't know how to do anything. So this was for my folks' 25th wedding anniversary, and I looked in all of our baby books and got the information.
Everybody's details.
And then there's one block for something that my folks would think of each one of us kids for. And then like the chickens and the garden stuff is what my dad would think of my mother for. And then on this side is things that my mom, my dad was a coon hunter.
That's how we used to go on dates, is going with your dad coon hunting.
And then Lena Baxter machine quilted it. But when they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary, it wasn't quilted yet. And my dad came in and looked at it and cried.
Oh. It's got their birthdays and the whole deal. I've never seen that.
Picture of the house then?
I forgot to say, yes, that's a replica of our home place. I forgot to say it's tricam embroidery.
I'm Linda Rodenkamp from Onaga now, and my mother grew up in Kelly, and Corning is where we all lived when they got married. And I can remember Mom working on this quilt when she was younger. So I don't know, it's in the 40s to 80s in there somewhere. And with having children, you know, I know she worked on it a long time because it was applique, and then she hand quilted it and all that, and the border, everything I think is hand sewn. And the boating.
You can tell in the back that the border's hand
and the
sewn.
back, yeah.
You can tell it's hand sewn.
Okay, so I was kind of very lucky to be one of the 7 children that got to have it.
whose this is.
It's mine.
Oh, okay.
Can I put my name on it?
Yeah, it's there. We just had it's there. I just didn't look. Yeah.
Again, I'm Nancy J. Merritt. I grew up 10 miles west of Centralia, went to Centralia School, and when I married my husband, we were stationed quite a few places in the U.S. and overseas. Then I retired from the state of California and him from the railroad. We moved back to Vermilion. Anyway, this is a quilt that my mother made out of my little dress scraps, starting in 47 through about 51. And a lot of the material is from sacks, flour sacks. And she and the Stitch and Chatter Club, which was about 10 or 12 ladies, met once a month, and they were all farm ladies, and they put it together in embroidery. And Mrs. Vaughn from Centralia is the one that did a lot of the quilting around Centralia.
Oh, come on over. Yeah, you can come on over there.
This is a baby quilt that was all right. This is a baby quilt that was made for my father-in-law. So it was his mother or his grandmother that made it. He was born in 1920. So it's 23 years old. If you notice, if you was looking up close, you can see that there's some red squares that are darker. Those were patched in when when the red got worn. So it's been patched. And you can, if you look close, there's some stitches on it that are both in red or white thread that are over top of the fabric. The red fabric did not hold up. And already back when she was still around, she had pageant. Who are you? Martha Turner. I live in Olsburg.
This quilt was given as a wedding present to my great-great-grandparents.
Go this way.
From my great-great-great-aunt. It was made by my great-great-great-grandmother, Mamie Hannenberg. And I got it for my birthday last year from my cousin.
That's awesome. Nice. So what's the era?
I don't know.
Debbie?
What do you think it was?
Last year we talked about documentation,
There it is.
Dee Groff went through the genealogy, and Grandma and Grandpa, my Grandma and Grandpa, her great-great-grandma and Grandpa, got married July 17th, 1917.
Oh.
So this quilt goes back to 1917.
It's in really good shape.
And it has, her second cousin, I think it is, had it and passed it on to Vivian. So we're all
Okay. Oops. I am Loretta Wag. This quilt was made by... Whoops. Mic drop. It's a mic drop, yes. By my husband's grandmother. There are 3 quilts. This is the first in the series. Her husband, Walter Ladwig,
And she took the design off of a magazine. If the date is up, that she did this one, the date is up in the upper left-hand corner. 1919. And see, they were German, and this was right after World War I, and people did not have a very high regard for Germany and for German people in those days, and to show their patriotism, she made this quilt. Now this one she made originally like with the blue shirting. The berries are applique fabric. It's done on a machine, so I don't know what sewing machine she used because that was 1919. The stars are embroidered, and there's a USA up on top that's embroidered, okay? Now, if you want to fold that one up, the next one she made for her daughter, but now it has been washed. And it's got, so some of that was done by a machine also. But the berries are hand embroidered this time, and the stars, and of course the colors, the blue ran. So if you want to move that one and then see, some of that was done by machine also, the applique.
Oh, okay.
Now this is the last one she did, and it was all done by hand. The provenance is on the bottom. She put her son's initials for Walter Amos Ladwig, November 1st, 1921. Now, this one I don't think has ever been washed. It's been at the Mulvane Art Center, it's been at San Clemente at Ronald Reagan's Museum. The USA she did in a darker color so it shows better. The stars are all hand embroidered. I don't know what they call that kind of embroidering because it's completely filled in. And the applique is all done by hand, and the stitching, of course, is like really narrow, really close. And it's just, the provenance of all three of them, the one, where they made the pattern, they tried it out, they tried this, they tried just, trying the pattern, and then she finally did this one, and supposedly, story was, she had taken it to the Topeka State Fair. Remember when Topeka used to have the big fair? Don't know what she got for it, have no idea if that's even true. But,
You need to take it over there so they can see it.
yes.
Sorry.
But it's a remarkable, and I'm glad they're all 3D, so you can see the process that they went through, developing the design, developing the fabrics, and what they wanted to do with it.
And so where are you from? You didn't tell me.
Onaga, yes.
Where was it displayed at again?
Well, it was at San Clemente with Ronald Reagan's library, yeah, there, and at the Mulvane Art Center in Topeka. But it's just a striking pattern, and it's an original. I mean, they took it off of a magazine. But people, if you were German back then, you actually had to carry a card with you that said you were an enemy alien, because Dwayne's grandmother, his grandma and grandpa Wag had to. She was born in this country. She still had to carry that card. It's a sad state of affairs when that happens, but it did a lot back in those days, and it still does in places. And people, right now it's like the Muslims. Nobody wants to be around them. They're all evil, but the Germans weren't all evil in this country. They were grateful to be here.
I'm Teresa Brishik, and I'm representing about 3 generations of quilts here. This is one. This is one that I made after I saw Mom's dahlia quilt. This is a dahlia quilt, and I saw hers, and I said, I'm going to make one like it so I can have one too. And this was one of the last quilts that I made, probably in the 2000s somewhere. And this is probably the first quilt I made. And I embroidered, I drew the flowers and embroidered them while I was going to my kids' ball games. So, and then I put it together in the Drunkard's Path pattern. Now my mother has quilted for many, 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 many years, and this is the quilt that she gave me in somewhere in the 2000s. She had made each of her 4 children a stained glass quilt. And this one is, I like the purple, so I got the purple. My sister had a quilt that was in blues, and Mother had taken a shower curtain that she liked that had a pattern on it. And she and I worked together, and she made a quilt out of it. And we had she needed a border for it, so we went and saw a stained glass piece in the post office, and we drew it off, and she embroidered it, and she made it into a stained glass quilt also. All that is hand stitched, and she hand quilts all of her quilts, and she hand quilted all of mine also. My mother was born in North Dakota, where her parents had moved shortly within the year before that. They had 9 children, and they were crossing the lake, the river up there, and her parents were crossing the river. They'd gone over to get supplies, and they came back at night because their car had broken down, and they went through the ice. So my mother's aunt, Minnie, who was about 50 years old, went up and got those 9 children and brought them back to St. Clair and raised those kids. And you talk about sweeping the dirt out of the middle of on a dirt floor. She had those kids sweep the dirt sidewalk every day. So they all got to learn how to work. This is a quilt that she got the pattern for, and it represents, she embroidered states and their flowers and their animal, I think, the bird, and the name of the state on there, and then put the quilt with the United States in the middle.
What number of state it was too.
Yeah, the year that they joined the Union.
Got the capitals on the flag.
The capitals are on.
With the star. With the star.
Kansas?
Well, like Kansas.
Right here.
Right, there's Topeka.
And then there's the Kansas flag.
Yeah, sunflower.
I'm from Soldier, Kansas. I'm from Soldier. My mother lived here in Onaga for many, many years. Before that, she lived out on the farm near Bucks Grove Church. If you ever go by on 16, there's a little church in the valley out there. That's where we went, where we grew up. That's where we went to church. And this quilt, I had purchased the box, the pattern, and I started cutting it out, and then I started having kids. And so my mom got up in my box that I had this in, and she took it back home, and she finished it, and she gave it to me. This is the Tree of Life quilt.
So what was your mother's name?
Rosemary Clements. And these are all quilts over here that she has made different years, and the little elephant quilt was one she made my kids, my boys, when they were little.
So what is the significance of the book? Minnie's.
The aunt that raised my mother was Aunt Minnie, and one of her nieces wrote the little books. They're little. My aunt was terribly afraid of storms, and she would always come. There were cyclones coming. There's cyclones coming, and they'd have to run to the cave. So that was one of the stories that they wrote about. They were just little stories about Aunt Minnie's life. And then, yes.
How Rosemary is now?
Mom is 103 and going to be 104 in May. She can't hardly see, so she's not able to quilt anymore. The last quilt she made is over there. We haven't quite finished it. We did tie it. It's not perfect because her eyes are failing a lot, And so I'm still trying to get her to go back and make some more 9-patch quilts, but she hasn't decided that's quite what she wants to do yet. So we're still working at it. The sewing machine that's sitting there is the one she has done all her sewing on since 1954, I think, is when my brother was born, and Dad got her that. She bought the machine at that time. So I think she did a lot of sewing. She did all our dresses and everything like that when we were small, and a lot of the boys' clothes also. So then this is her grandmother's quilt that she made. And as you can see, the bindings are not the same. They're just hand-stitched bindings, and so this had been made back in the 1800s somewhere. She really didn't know when it was. It was Hannah Bowling was her name. And that's the log cabin quilt. Yes. And this is another one that she had made, and it didn't have a backing on it, so Mom put a backing on it, and she put the binding on it. And I think that's her.
With that last generational display of quilts, that ends our collection that is on display today to be talked about. Let's give everybody a round of applause. I was asked, I don't know why I put that up there, I was asked if anyone in here restores old quilts, or if you know someone that does restore old quilts. If you happen to be that person or know that person, you might give me that information later on so we can pass that on. When we had you sign in, you always think of what should have happened after it's too late. If anybody wants to be on an email list for this event for next year, Joan, you want to get a piece of paper out, and if you would sign before you leave on a piece of paper that Joan will put back there. We have a lot of quilts out today. We brought some of our quilts down from the museum, just to let you know that we do collect quilts up there, and we're doing our best to preserve those. I hope all of you will take a minute to look at Rosemarie Clement's quilt collection over there. It truly is a marvelous, marvelous collection. How many of you know Rosemarie and her quilting? I want to point out at the back, there is an owl back there. We will be, Onaga Historical Society will be hosting a soup lunch in a couple of weeks, and we have some things on the silent auction, one of which is the owl, and we don't have time for me to tell you the story of the owl, but there's a story that goes with it. So you might take a look at that. I do want to ask you a couple of things. How many of you in here are quilters? How many of you are never going to be a quilter? But you do know how to thread a needle. How to know if you're a quilter? There's more fabric in your house than food. Fat quarters are not the heaviest part of your body. Your ironing board is always set up, but you never iron clothes. You think of your job as an interruption of your quilting time. Oh yeah. You pet your fabric. How many of you looked at some of these quilts today and felt them? People are always picking threads off of you. Or you carry a roller around. You can measure a scant 1/4 inch by your eye. Featherweight does not mean a boxer. Your UFOs are not from outer space. You clean your sewing room and they think you're leaving town. This was given to me by a quilter that couldn't be here today. What makes a quilt so special? And it was written by Debbie Anderson Serles. Surely when the final stitch is entered and the needle laid to rest, only a quilter can know the feeling of pride soaring within her soul. She has the contentment of knowing that a long, hard journey has come to an end. She has conquered challenge, and through her own patience and endurance, has created a loving work of art. It may well live on long after she has finished her walk on this earth. Perhaps what makes a quilt so special is that pride a quilter knows, that deep in her heart she knows some distant future generation might gaze upon her quilt or touch its fragile threads and still feel the love and care that she has sewn in every stitch. How many of you feel that describes the quilts we saw today? They will live on forever. And we did have several generation quilts here today, and we have our baby quilts, 2000 and above, or our baby quilts, but they'll still be around in 2022. I can't. They'll be here a couple centuries yet and live on. With that, I would like Joan to come up. Well, first of all, I'd like Dee to stand up. Dee is the one who found this Quilters Stand for Ukraine project to support the families in Ukraine, and it doesn't seem like things are getting better for Ukraine lately. Just a quick count, it looks like about $150 will be going to UNICEF for Ukraine on behalf of all of you. And Joan, you want to pull the winning, and Dee is the one that crafted the Ukraine star. And she did it so that it can be a wall hanging or a tabletop or however you want on that. So,
That's for emails.
And here's the sheet for emails.
I have my coat on because I went outside and you need it. That wind is horrid.
Addie Luttrell. Actually, it says Adri. I got the wrong one. Adri Luttrell. And now, if we can have a train of people